Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today for the Nonprofit Capacity Building Trends and CDFA Funding webinar. We're so happy to have you joining us. Today we're going to run through, for those of you who may not be familiar, a quick overview of the Community Development Finance Authority. Then we're going to transition to talk about trends and themes in capacity building from a national perspective. And then we'll dive into our CDFA's capacity building program and themes that we're seeing in applications and current grantees. And then we'll leave some time at the end for some discussion and questions. And throughout the program, you'll hear from my colleagues Betsy McNamara and Molly Donovan. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Betsy to walk you through a little bit about CDFA.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. My name is Betsy McNamara. I'm a consultant working with CDFA. I'm based in Concord, and I come to this work having done a lot of these applications, the tax credit applications, and it's been terrific for me to learn from all of the team about how the whole process works. So I'm happy to introduce to you a little bit about CDFA. The Community Development Finance Authority is a statewide community and economic development entity serving all of New Hampshire. It's a state chartered independent nonprofit organization, much like other state authorities, such as the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority and the Business Finance Authority. CDFA's board is appointed by the governor. CDFA's mission is to maximize the value and impact of community development, economic development, and clean energy initiatives throughout the Granite State. And CDFA sees a future New Hampshire whose communities are economically and socially resilient, reflect and respect their natural surroundings, and are places where people want to live, work, and play. To achieve this vision, CDFA meets the evolving community and economic development needs of New Hampshire communities. CDFA approaches its work with integrity. It prioritizes collaboration and strives to be adaptable to changing needs and issues, respects people in place, and makes focused investments that promote prosperity for all. And I just want to note that we all come to this webinar at a time of disruption and uncertainty. And what we present today is what the team at CDFA understands to be the trends in capacity building and how we expect to respond through our capacity building tax credit program. But we know that you have access to information and experiences that we do not. So we see this webinar as an opportunity to learn from you as well. In state fiscal year 2025, CDFA made 69 targeted investments in community-based projects totaling more than $16.5 million in support of community development, economic development, and energy projects across New Hampshire. These investments supported nonprofits, municipalities, and small businesses in delivering essential services, creating jobs, developing affordable housing, increasing access to childcare, enhancing energy efficiency, and strengthening local economies. CDFA supported projects that yielded measurable outcomes. There were 40,727 individuals served, 185 housing units rehabilitated, preserved, or created, 342 small businesses supported, 54 jobs created or retained, and 97,676 square feet of space developed or rehabilitated. We had 160 unique businesses contributing to impactful projects statewide. These business donors have remained steadfast in their commitment to the work of CDFA and remain important and critical partners. CDFA's impact is seen in revitalized neighborhoods, downtowns and community spaces, addressing affordable housing and infrastructure needs, empowering small businesses and increasing access to economic opportunities, expanding access to affordable childcare and critical services in community facilities, investing in energy-saving improvements and renewable energy initiatives, and strengthening nonprofits and community-led initiatives to drive local impact. CDFA invests in the people of New Hampshire by deploying a well-tuned, effective investment system, enabling partners to make transformational and sustainable changes and taking an innovative and collaborative approach to development finance. CDFA provides a variety of financial resources, including the competitive deployment of grants, loans, and state tax credit equity. CDFA resources enable our partners to identify a community need, explore ways to meet that need, and ultimately develop and implement a solution. We're dedicated to supporting our partners in this work and have the resources to do so in all stages of the community economic development ecosystem. And now I am happy to introduce Molly Donovan, New Hampshire CDFA's Director of Development.
Thanks, Betsy. So nice to be here with you and Melissa and talk about capacity building. As you said earlier, the CDFA staff are building their knowledge on capacity building, and always happy to hear from our audience in terms of what your experience has been. Uh, Here's a simple definition of capacity building that we'd like to share. And when we think about capacity building in our grant making, we really think about building the skills and the abilities and the processes of organizations. So very much people-centered, with the goal that we're helping you fulfill your mission and strengthen the economy and strengthen your community. The National Council of Nonprofits defines nonprofit capacity building as whatever is needed to bring a nonprofit to the next level of operational, programmatic, financial, or organizational maturity. And you'll hear a little later, I'll talk to you about the different stages of nonprofit development. This a reference to the organizational maturity. There's some really good work that the Hewlett Foundation did back in 2022 about capacity building, and they talk about that even the term capacity building has evolved, and a new definition has been adopted by the grant makers for effective organizations that explicitly names powers and communities in the process. Capacity building is the process of building and strengthening the systems, structures, cultures, skills, resources, and power that organizations need to serve their community. Next, I just am sharing a quote from our executive director because I want you all who are watching this to understand that at CDFA, capacity building is foundational to all the work we do, to all the funding we do in the bricks and mortar side of the tax credit program and our community development block grant program. We know that strong organizations are foundational to doing good community economic development. And at CDFA, we're building out this vision of what capacity means for us and hopefully for you. And I hope you can relate to some of these. We're very interested in sharing our definition of community economic development, which is a people-based, community-based decision-making around strengthening economy and the community. Second, priority populations are identified and served, and so they're largely identified through data, through stories, through experiences that you have serving community. But we know it's important to identify and further serve the priority populations. We know it's important as we think about capacity building to disrupt the systems to better serve. All systems can be improved. This is really difficult work, and it's actually not a criticism of current systems so much as a recognition that they can be strengthened and they can be changed over time. So that is part of our vision. We're interested in building organizational assets and capital. And so in our capacity building program, we're often looking to organizations that'll eventually move towards assets and capital, which largely amount to bricks and mortar, or if you're a social service agency and you want to buy your own building and open up a service center along your main street, et cetera. So we want you to have assets to strengthen your organization. And then finally, we are always looking to enhance facilities both for the service provider and for the community. So we'd like to see that there's an impact in terms of where the organization is choosing to renovate a building or choosing to provide services, and that adds to the economy and cultural vibrancy of that place. I thought it would be really important to share these themes of nonprofit capacity building that we shared last year on a similar webinar. It's important to us to go back each year and see what's changed and to uplift what Betsy said in the introduction. It has been a year of change and a year of disruption and upheaval. So a particularly interesting time to look back at last year. These were the themes that we were finding nationally that folks were talking about in the nonprofit sector. Focus on long-term sustainability. I think this really grew out of the work in the pandemic that the nonprofit sector faced and addressed, and the changes they made, trying to answer the question of how can we do this long term and what are our sustainability efforts. There was a recognition and a lot of conversation in the last couple of years about historic biases in the work that we've done. And that certainly remains to be a really important topic for the sector. Um, there is, I think, if you look back at years and years of themes in nonprofit work, support for networks, coalitions, partnerships, movements has always been there, at least for the last 20 years or so. Really, the idea that many organizations will be stronger by pulling together a network or collaborating on programs or projects or advocacy, et cetera. We look at asset framing models. CDFA does this regularly throughout our programs, and this was a trend across the nation. And this is the idea that we're looking at things in a positive way. So we're looking at the assets of a community or a project or an organization and thinking how to build on those assets and not just focusing on the deficits or the challenges they're facing. We also know that in the past couple of years, there's been more conversation about the importance of naming the value of power in serving communities and recognizing who holds the power in different areas of the nonprofit sector, and in your topical work to better understand how decisions are made and how people are impacted. And then finally, staffing shortages and burnout. This was something well talked about throughout the pandemic, with all the important work that was done by the nonprofit sector really had an impact on whether people stayed working in that sector, and whether people who stayed were burned out from what they had accomplished during the pandemic. So next, what I want to share with you are some immediate themes that we are seeing as an organization. I'm not yet ready to call these trends because there just hasn't been enough time to call them actual trends. But I would say these are themes we've seen over the last 10, 11 months. Curious whether others have seen these themes. I'm sure there are others out there. One, and these are not ranked, they're just listed here on the slide for you. There are challenges on many fronts, and so you may be facing challenges in terms of funding, in terms of the service you're providing, et cetera. And so it's a time where organizations and their boards are really juggling a lot of different challenges. Certainly, there's been a loss and continued uncertainty of government funding. And we know that has impacted organizations in our state and nonprofits across the country. It's hard to measure what this uncertainty is doing to the sector. I think all the individual conversations we have had have told us that people feel uncertain about what type of funding they will have in the future and how to plan for that long-term sustainability that I talked about in the previous slide. And increased demand for services across the nonprofit sector. With the loss of government services, some of that work is assumed to be picked up by the nonprofit sector. And there just are people in need because of the changes in government funding. And I know many of you are trying to expand your services or at least are identifying what services are needed or what needs are going unmet. Um, we are seeing and hearing about staffing shortages that have continued really throughout the last 5 or 6 years, but seem more profound right now. And what some people are calling a crisis fatigue. This sense that the nonprofit sector really rallied together in terms of the services they provided during the pandemic. And there was barely any time to catch your breath and um, really learn from that effort. And now we're in this next crisis with the lack of government funding. Technology adoption. Many people are talking about this will be the year we look back and remember that AI was everywhere. And so I know a lot of organizations, including CDFA, are looking at adoption of new technology or use of AI. How do we use it? What's our policy? What works? What doesn't work? And that requires training and time and effort. So we know that's a challenge that many of you are facing. And it's interesting to note at this time, some of the research across the country is showing that there's an increased trust in the nonprofit sector, especially when it's compared to the business and government sector. So that's an important piece to note because I think many of our publics are still trusting the nonprofit sector. And where we see that particularly happening is in at the local level. So the research shows that most people are really comfortable with the nonprofits that are serving their community locally. They know them, they know who's on their board, and that trust is really important. Some of the studies show that just when folks are asked generally about nonprofits, there can be a negative reaction, but very positive reaction when there's talk about the local nonprofit and what it does to serve community. So just a little bit about the CDFA capacity building program. This is a subset of our tax credit program, and we have a limited amount of funding is available, but excited to share what our priorities are this year. And they haven't changed much from last year. And again, these are not ranked. These are just here to share with you. Some of our applicants or interested applicants might meet a couple of these funding priorities. Some of you might have just one of these funding priorities. I think it's important to have at least one or consider the project that or the program that you're thinking of through the lens of these funding priorities. We always get far more applications than we can fund. And one of the things we certainly look at are these funding priorities. The first I'll share is collaboration, partnerships, and strategic alliances that strengthen your organization. I mentioned this earlier as a trend in locally and statewide and nationally in nonprofits. I think there's a new term here that we're sharing and that I want to talk a little bit about, and that's strategic alliances. And I'd urge you to take a look at the difference between collaboration, cooperation, partnership. I think these are all terms that are very interrelated, and there's even some overlap with them. But it's really the idea that you're not working on your own. You're identifying what other nonprofits or what other sometimes even business can be a partner in what you're doing. We're introducing strategic alliances here because this is where you and another nonprofit or a group of nonprofits may decide that you want to put together an alliance to strengthen and share your resources. Maybe share your office space. Maybe have a staff person that works in different organizations with similar missions. Maybe your back office operations are done by the same bookkeeper, and you're sharing any kind of office processes together. And so we know in this time of decreased funding, we know those operational pieces are challenging, and you may want to think about this collaboration, partnership, or strategic alliance. And happy to talk to you about that if you, especially if you have organizations you're thinking of connecting with. And if not, we're always thinking about which organizations should know each other. So happy to have a conversation about that. The second funding priority, place-based strategies to support priority populations, revitalize community and local economies. This is the idea that in the projects we do, in the individual programs or projects, we want to see that there's an impact on place, that maybe you make a Main Street or downtown look better, be more vibrant, bring community to the street, etc. And so it's part of a community's revitalization effort. And we're really interested, as we are across all our funding priorities, to know whether you're working with a priority population, what population that is, and how you know that's a priority population. For several years, we've funded innovative models of governance, initiatives, or organizations. If you have an idea for something new and different, and it's grounded in some good research, or a model from a different organization or a different part of the country, and you want to try something different, come and talk to us. This is a fund where we will fund that type of project. We're willing to try projects that we're learning from and that don't have a guaranteed outcome, because we want to see what will strengthen the nonprofits in the New Hampshire sector. And then finally, community engagement. So any efforts that engage the community so they can share what their priority is in terms of moving their community forward and revitalizing their community, or bringing more investment to their community. And community engagement takes many, many forms. And we're certainly not defining what those forms are, but anywhere that you bring people into the process of doing your work is something we're really interested in. Here's a slide from Good Work, which is a nonprofit organization serving the Seacoast region. They received a capacity building grant from us to bring together, around 20 nonprofits on the broadly defined in the Seacoast area. These were nonprofits that are social service oriented and were interested, one, to know each other, two, to have their staffs know each other, learn from each other, support each other, and create a network of those doing direct service work. And they were mostly interested in discovering how they might better collaborate together to do what they call serving the line and shortening the line in terms of the services that they offered. And so we were able to give them a grant to hire a consultant that's brought them together. The first year was trust building and getting to know each other, building relationships and networks. And now they're entering their second year to determine how it is they're going to work together going forward. And so that really falls under innovative model. This is a systems change effort that I know I haven't seen across the state, and we're also really interested in this work and any project that comes to us that can be replicated in other parts of the state certainly falls into that collaboration and partnership piece as well. If you're not familiar with, I'm always happy to share with you BAPOC, which is the Business Alliance, or the Business Alliance for People of Color. Another grantee of ours, I think 3 years ago now, This is an organization that was moving from all volunteer to a first-time staff position, a very hard stage of nonprofit development. There is typically work to be done with the board and potential new staff person. And so we've been able to support them with some consulting services to move through that process. They're obviously working with priority populations. This is an organization that's focused on the small business community and bringing resources to small businesses that have been traditionally underserved in the state of New Hampshire. Next, I'd like to share with you Our Place, New Hampshire. What a great picture of these folks holding up their logo and their sign. This is an organization that is working to ensure that there's residential opportunities for adults in the disabled community to live independently and receive some services. This is a project where they were moving forward in terms of a home and home renovation to make available to a number of clients, and they were looking for capacity building support because they determined they needed to go from an all volunteer board to an executive director who could work through the financing and governance of this organization and also do some of the fundraising. So some of the trends that we've seen in our capacity building over the past 5, 6 years or so is that critical needs and priorities are met. And so we often hear of really great ideas that maybe are not things that are experienced widely across the state. And we often have to look at what are the critical or largest needs. So we've done a fair amount of funding in the past couple of years on housing and childcare, because as we know, as I assume you know, this is a very big need across the state. The other thing that we have looked back at our fundraising and I'm sorry, grant making and understand is that we're often funding organizations that are new or in the early stages of organizational development. And actually, sometimes they're not even 501(c)(3s. They have a fiscal sponsor because it's a project or maybe a collaboration of organizations that'll never be a 501(c)(3, but they're coming together to work, say, on the housing issues in their region. And so we think this is a really good spot for us to support these new and early stage organizations. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we also see that we're funding organizations that are making that leap from early stage to growth. And so maybe they're trying a new program or expanding a program or expanding their staff or trying something new and innovative that they've not done before. And finally, we like to see this link or an eventual link to bricks and mortar renovation projects, revitalization projects that have value in and of themselves, and they bring value to the place that they're located. As I said, these are some of the current critical needs and priorities in New Hampshire. Certainly, housing, we all know we're in a housing crisis across the state. And we're specifically focused on the most vulnerable populations. So we funded several housing initiatives in the past year, but that is not the actual building of housing or increasing the housing supply. It tends to be projects and collaborations, organizations that are working to educate, advocate, bring people together around the changes we need in housing so they can move forward in support of housing in their region or their community. We are very interested in advancing sustainability models regarding the childcare sector, and that can be all areas of the childcare sector, both family family-based childcare and center childcare, and anything from staffing to governance to back office operations, et cetera. And then again, the engagement piece, really making sure that decisions at the local level have community voice in them. As I said, here are some of the projects we funded this past year in housing. And each one of these is actually different from the other. Habitat for Humanity is funded to really expand their mission and to start a program of home renovation and remodeling. I think we all know Habitat it is known for building individual homes and communities, and they see a real need to be renovating the existing homes and communities. And the Committee for Concord's plan to end homelessness, this is a municipal effort to bring all the players in the that are trying to address homelessness in Concord together from a municipal's viewpoint and have them address and come up with a plan and an action plan for the homeless population in Concord. And the Eastern Monadnock Housing Security Coalition. This is a coalition, not a nonprofit, led by the churches in this region of the state who would like to be a part of the housing solution and be better connected with each other and connected with those that are working on the housing issue in this region. And so we're funding them to bring people together to help make these decisions. The Coos County Directors Network. This is a child care initiative. Lovely photo you can see here. Um, this would fall under innovative and partnerships and collaboration, and even innovative models of governance. So there are a number of child care providers in Coos County, all of different sizes, shapes, operations, et cetera, who've been working together for quite some time and have determined that most of the staff and directors of childcare want to work with kids. That's why they're in this business, and that the operational and governance of child care centers takes a certain amount of work and a different set of skills. And so this grantee has funding in place to set up actually a new nonprofit to do the back office operations for the child care centers in Coos County collectively. And so we like this because it addresses a specific need that they were able to really detail to us and is potentially a model for other parts of the state. As I said, we're often looking at the stages that nonprofits are in terms of our grant making, new organizations that are working with priority populations. And sometimes, and BAPOC was an example of this, sometimes it's existing organizations that are identifying and wanting to work with a priority population. Um, Also in the early stage, many of our applicants are moving from all volunteer to their first executive director or their first development director. And this is a whole body of work in the nonprofit sector. Been through it myself, not an easy process, takes time and expertise to move really a volunteer passionate board to defining what the role of the first executive director is. And often consulting services will help with that. And sometimes we have visionary leaders who are expert in their topic area, have brought people together in their topic area, and have educated the community. And they need support in operational capacity. Not everyone who has a passion and is trying to make change knows how to run a nonprofit. And so sometimes support is needed to move into that. So these are all early stages of nonprofits. You don't have to name these stages in our application, but we share them because I have found that it helps potential applicants to frame where they are and what it is they're really trying to do in an application to us. Another example to share with you is the Youth Success Project. This is a youth-led organization started in Plymouth and is working in other areas of the state trying to address youth homelessness. So here's a specific population that is not well served across the state, and so they are working on this. They have a first executive director. They have a fiscal sponsor, so they're not a full 501(c)(3) yet. And so we're supporting them to move through those processes. Organizations that are growing that we have funded. As I mentioned earlier, a new outreach to a priority population, and organizations that are doing either local or regional work that now want to bring their work statewide. They have to demonstrate to us why there is a need statewide and that there's no other organization providing this service. But that is a really important step and a sometimes complicated step to scale up the programs that you're running to meet a statewide need. And then long-standing organizations that are trying new and innovative work, we're interested in supporting those as well. One of those you'll see on this slide is the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. You may know this is a well-established, long-standing nonprofit in the state of New Hampshire. They have been doing historic preservation work across the state at the local level, regional level. They bring education on historic preservation. They had done a study because they were seeing this anecdotally, that they don't have the next generation of contractors who specialize in historic renovation work, whether that's on windows or roofing or even the architectural side of the work that they do. And so they're really interested in building out those skills in the next generation of youth so that there are people who can take over this work from those that have been doing it in the state. And so they came to us, again, not a organization that's new or hasn't done their own fundraising, et cetera. But this was really a challenge for them to move into the workforce development space, something they never imagined, but something that they were able to demonstrate they really had to do. And they were looking for support to do that. And so they've been running over the last 2 years different cohorts of training programs for high schoolers. And you can see here they're bringing in their current craftspeople from around the state to do some early training with some of the young people in our state. So that's really considered an innovative program from a long-standing organization. And then finally, links with infrastructure projects. If your program or project needs a new facility or program space or center, we're either in this program or through our full tax credit program or CDBG program, always interested in programs and initiatives that lead to the renovation of our fine buildings across the state. And then we also see on occasion new program that's due to a facility, meaning a new facility has been renovated or is up and running, and the organization finds that they have space to do more in terms of serving their community. Couple examples of these. The first is here in the city of Franklin. I think many of you are aware that over the past 10 years or so, there's been significant change and investment in the city of Franklin. And in their downtown area primarily. And then their city hall and their opera house was in need of significant reinvestment, even to the point that the fire department had shut it down and didn't want them to use this historic building, which is actually an anchor on their main street and anchors all the other revitalization that's been happening. And they're public, their community is a little weary of 10 years of change and renovation. And so they came to us for funding under that community engagement piece to bring in a consultant to work with them and work with the downtown businesses and neighbors and community as a whole to understand why the City Hall and the Opera House should be renovated. The Opera House serves as the performance center for the schools. And so there's a direct link with the arts and young people in Franklin, and they need the facility for that. It also has the potential to be a revenue generator through the other art offerings that go on through the year. And so they did a series of focus groups, community meetings, conversations, etc., to bring their public up to speed and to move forward in deciding to renovate their City Hall and their Opera House. So that's a community engagement effort we've funded last year, maybe the year before, but that work is just closing out now and has been quite successful. Um, Another one I want to share with you. This is the 1269 Cafe in Manchester. Look at that beautiful quilt and the sunshine in this room. The 12 on Union Street, which is a facility that provides housing to the homeless population in Manchester, renovated an old school. I was lucky enough to take a tour of this facility, and they were really clever in their design and saved some of the chalkboards and this existing woodworking and et cetera. And they have volunteers that make these quilts for each of the beds in the facility. They had actually already been in the renovation process of the building itself when they realized this was a lot for an all-volunteer board. And once the renovations were done, they were really looking at that sustainability question. And so they came to us, and we were able to help them fund a consultant to help them determine whether they'd hire an executive director, funding person, program person, and how to make sure they stabilized and moved the organization forward now that they had a facility. And they were successful at selling their tax credits, and their programming has been quite successful as well.
Hello.
I'm going to turn it over to you, Betsy, at this point. So thank you.
Thank you, Molly.
Oh,
That's a great overview and such great details of projects funded. So if an organization is interested in learning more about New Hampshire CDFA's capacity building tax credit program, we're going to go into a little bit of detail here. The purpose of the capacity building tax credit program is to support nonprofits in building their own capacity to advance community economic development and infrastructure projects. And this program focuses on meeting the needs of priority populations and communities with high need and limited investment. These are applications, online applications. They're due March 6th, 2026. And you have, they are awards of up to $150,000 over 2 years or a maximum of $75,000 per year. The funding priorities, again, are supporting networks, coalitions, and collaboration among community economic development efforts to create meaningful impact and change for communities. Investment in place-based strategies that support priority populations, revitalize community, and strengthen local economies. Innovative models of governance, initiatives, or organizations where the innovation enhances the outcomes of community economic development, and efforts to engage the community broadly, as Molly was talking of this, for example, in Franklin, looking to engage the community broadly and deeply for community priority setting, the identification of community economic development assets, and place-based reinvestment and revitalization. These are the kinds of projects that are prioritized through the application review process. Projects or collaborations that build the capacity of priority populations and organizations to implement community economic development solutions and traditional infrastructure projects, and groups and organizations that have been historically under-resourced and therefore have greater financial need and a reduced ability to raise these funds from other sources. And so the kinds of things that the capacity building tax credit program funds are hiring a consultant, bringing on new staff, developing outreach to new populations, or new initiatives on statewide issues such as workforce. What CDFA provides in terms of support, as if your organization or you represent a project that's considering looking into building its own capacity, CDFA's strategic vision calls for deploying capital and place-based strategies that support underserved populations, invest in underserved places, and fundamentally impact communities and strengthen local economies. And CDFA capital is invested in both nonprofit organizations and cities and towns across the state. In addition to the deployment of funding, CDFA provides ongoing technical assistance and assists with network building, asset management, compliance, and analyzing data and outcomes. And we do this through ongoing technical support throughout the cycle of a project, such as we offer some grant writing assistance funding. We just participate in network building and data and outcome analysis on critical issues such as affordable housing, childcare, and other indicators of community economic development. We also offer meetings. We want to be in conversation with your organization or project, both in discovery, so there may be an initial conversation, and then if you do decide to apply, a slightly more structured pre-application meeting with staff, the CDFA team. So the next steps in figuring out if the capacity building tax credit program is right for your organization or project these are the next steps. Schedule a discovery meeting. And in this meeting, someone from CDFA staff will meet with you to talk about your specific projects to help you determine if it's a good fit for tax credits. We have upcoming workshops that you can sign up for. There are 3 in mid-January that go into much more detail about the programs and the applications. And then consider the grant writing support. This is a first come, first serve. So you would have to get your application in soon to be sure that you would have access to that. But again, the deadline for the tax credits is March 6th at 4 p.m. And so you do have some time to consider as you access these resources that CDFA decides. A little bit more about the grant writing assistance program now. This program is designed to help smaller organizations with limited capacity or experience to obtain the assistance of a professional grant writer who can help develop a strong and viable CDFA tax credit or community or capacity building program application. Applicants may apply for up to $3,000 to hire a grant writer should they need the additional capacity, language access, or other technical support to successfully submit an application. And those applications are now open in CDFA's grants management system. Applications received by December 19th will be decided by December 31st, and applications received by January 16th will be decided by January 30th. But again, it'd be great if you could get an application in for the December deadline. These funds are limited. You can find additional information on how to apply for grant writing assistance in our application and program guide that is online. Here is a nice QR code for you to schedule your discovery meeting if that's of interest to you. And then the next slide allows you to sign up for workshops, and we have a tax credit and capacity building program overview, and then 2 workshops that go into a deep dive on what the application for the tax credit program looks like and how best to answering many questions in advance that you will likely have as you're filling out the application. And then the same deep dive on the capacity building program application. also in January. And you can use this QR code to register. You can also find links to register in the app and program guide and on New Hampshire CDFA's website. And that concludes our presentation today. Thank you to everyone who joined.